We live in a new era for movie musical adaptations. The original golden age of the 1930s and 50s movie musicals gave way to a decreasing interest in the 80s and 90s, with only the Disney Renaissance dominating the field at this time. However, as we moved into the 21st century, we had a few early highlights, such as 2002's Chicago, winner of 6 Academy Awards, and more recently, the genre has experienced a resurgence of sorts, bolstered by the success of 2016's La La Land, a fellow Academy Award winner. Since then, we've had some major successes, but also some massive duds. And they're all great for their own reasons. And yet, there are a great many musicals that never get to debut on the big screen, but not for lack of trying. Whether it's from the inherent difficulty of the stage-to-screen adaptation process, or external factors, many musicals have been put forward as movie candidates, but face continuous issues that place it in an unending production limbo. Some of these were eventually made into movies, albeit under different directions, some fully vanished, and others may still someday happen. Here are 5 movie musicals that never were. One of Andrew Lloyd Webber's most remarkable musicals, Cats can be briefly described as a musical about anthropomorphic cats performing in a competition to see which one of them will get to die and be reborn. It's kind of an adaptation of T.S. Eliot's Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, a collection of poems about the Jellicle cats, as they are called. Now, even before Andy got the rights to adapt this book, T.S. Eliot had rejected a pitch from Disney to adapt it into an animated feature in fear that his practical cats would become pussycats or be turned into cartoon cats, although Disney would suspiciously release Aristocats soon after. Now, despite its insane plot, or lack thereof depending on your take, Cats has had immense success, running for 18 years on Broadway and 21 on the West End, and is credited as the originator for the mega musical phenomenon. Carrying its own brand of entertainment appeal, the fateful 2019 adaptation brought this already bizarre property to full-on infamy. But before there was ever such a thing as digital fur technology, Cats was supposed to come to life as an animated movie by director Steven Spielberg. This collaboration between Andy and Spielberg seemed almost fated. Not only have the two been compared as innovators in their respective fields, a comparison that Andy responded to by saying he'd love to work with Spielberg, but the two actually lived in the same building. After at least 2 years of behind-the-scenes talks, they made a deal in 1990 to adapt the musical into a film, to be funded by Universal Studios and produced by Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment, specifically its subsidiary Amblimation, which was still working on an American tale, Fievel Goes West. This version of Cats had a lot of ambition and intent, unsurprising for a Spielberg production. The setting had its own unique direction, placing the story in the blitz streets of London in the 1940s, replicating to a certain degree the junkyard setting of the stage show. Furthermore, according to Hans Bacher, hired to create the look of the movie, the plan was to somehow combine built miniature models together with traditional animation for the cats. An ambitious plan which could have been seriously impressive if done right. Spielberg also expressed his interest for the visual style to be Brechtian, although the art directors apparently had little idea of what that meant. As you can see, we have a lot of concept art for this project, spanning its many years of pre-production, including Bacher's and art director Luc Demarchelier's location designs, and Carlos Grangel's character designs, which include 2 new kittens, Grace Alora and Bumblepots. After the underwhelming performance of Amblin's An American Tail sequel, and 6 months into Cats, however, the project was shelved. It would be revived in 1995, after the release of We're Back! A Dinosaur Story, which also had subpar success. Previous Spielberg collaborator, playwright Tom Stoppard, was brought in to work on the script. Drafts of the script can apparently still be found in the Harry Ransom Center, which I do not have access to, but thankfully others have talked about it. Luc Demarchelier would explain the great difficulties of adapting the musical. The added complication was that the existing music could not be changed or moved around, yet had to be shoehorned into the classic 3 acts movie structure. It seems nobody was able to figure this one out. Yet, it would have been simple to stay true to the source materials and organize the movie as a series of shorts loosely connected with recurring characters. Unfortunately, this was never on the table. Features of the Stoppard drafts included an overture showing the cats both as how humans see them and how cats see each other, presenting an explanation for their anthropomorphic appearance, as well as a higher presence from Mungo Jerry and Rumpelteazer, the cat acrobat duo, who were chosen as the leads for the movie as, according to Spielberg, they embodied the movie's theme and microcosm. As described by Peter C. Koons in his article regarding this unproduced film, the plot revolves around Mungo Jerry and Rumpelteazer almost drowning in the opening scene, only to be saved by Demeter, who introduces them into the world of the Jellicle cats. Stoppard cast Grisabella as a Jellicle cat who was rejected by the other Jellicles because she loved Macavity. When he rejects her, she has no one and wanders around pathetically. Macavity kidnaps old Deuteronomy, and the Jellicles respond by forming a search party. The original plans called for Macavity to be electrocuted on the live rail of the train tracks during a confrontation with Mr. Mistopheles, but Stoppard instead had Macavity swept away by rushing water during a showdown on the bridge with Mungo Jerry. The ending from the stage show remains, with Grisabella performing a lament and being picked to be euthanized, / sent to the Heaviside layer. In early 1995, however, Stoppard would leave the project due to a lack of communication, and the project would be shelved once again. Finally, despite one final attempt to save it by hiring writers Joe Cullen and Alex Sokolow to edit Stoppard's scripts, the project would be stopped on its heels with the failure of Amblimation's third movie, Balto, and its closure in 1997, with all of its employees moving on to DreamWorks. Andy was apparently glad to see this project die for good, stating in 2019, "I remember thinking, how do I get out of this one?" But nothing happened and it was pretty much forgotten until Tom took it over. Cats would receive a recorded stage film in 1998, now seen to be the most iconic iteration of the show, and finally in 2019, Cats would come out with its own nightmare live-action CGI movie. Surprisingly, certain concepts from the previous iteration did make it to the movie, as Spielberg and Amblin Entertainment were involved in its production. Various sets and shots seem to echo concept art for the 90s version, and the reorganizing of the plot to feature Victoria as the designated lead who joins the Jellicle cats is much like Mungo Jerry and Rumpelteazer's roles in Stoppard's scripts. There is no way of knowing whether the 90s version would have been better plot-wise, but boy oh boy, it couldn't have been visually worse than what we got. Little Shop of Horrors is the brainchild of Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, the duo who would later create The Little Mermaid and then lead the Disney Renaissance. It is itself a musical adaptation of the 1960 movie of the same name, and follows Florist Seymour Krelborn as he enters a deal with the devil scenario, except the devil in this case is a man-eating plant from outer space called Audrey 2. The show has always been successful, and even had its own cult classic movie adaptation in 1986, directed by Frank Oz, frequent collaborator with Jim Henson, and featured a still unbeatable Audrey 2. No CGI here, folks. And yet, despite this already successful adaptation, there were solid plans for Little Shop to return to cinemas. We can trace this back to 2012, with Warner Bros. As the studio heading the project. The first rumors swirling around revolved around the potential casting of Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Seymour, with the screenplay coming from Roberto Aguirre Sacasa, writer of the Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark rework, and eventual writer for Riverdale and the Sabrina reboot, as well as the chief executive officer of Archie Comics. This initial rumor seems to have fallen through in the next few years. In December 2016, the writer attached to the project was now Matthew Robinson, and the director was Greg Berlanti, whose credits include basically all the DC Comics TV shows as well as Netflix's You. He would also be the executive producer to both Riverdale and Sabrina. Though we can't be sure of what the direction of this movie was meant to be like, we can speculate that it would have likely had a strong comic book feel, as both Aguirre Sacasa and Berlanti had first-hand experience in comic book projects. In 2017, Berlanti would outright refute the rumors that Josh Gad and Rebel Wilson were being considered for the leads. Yeah, these were actual rumors at one point, likely just spread to create clicks and controversy. Another pertinent rumor would be that Lady Gaga was being cast as Audrey, but these were quite vague rumors about her being offered an acting role, likely for a musical. Personally, I believe they could have been extremely early negotiations for her role in the Joker sequel, another musical produced by Warner Bros. The next lot of solid news would come in 2020, with its potential casting as the focus. The movie, if negotiations went well, would have starred Taron Egerton and Scarlett Johansson as Seymour and Audrey, respectively. Chris Evans would be Dentist Oren, and Billy Porter would be Audrey 2, a role he played in Little Shop's 2003 Broadway tryout, which he was, according to him, let go from, and part of its Broadway run.
Like, see, you get everything, your secret, greasy heart desire.
There are even rumors that girl group Little Mix would potentially join the cast as the street urchin Greek chorus. A bizarre mix of casting, to say the least, albeit one that could have led to a decent flick, or more likely, an absolute hot mess. Reactions to this casting and the very idea of another Little Shop movie were, expectedly, not wholly positive. Many thought the casting of all but Porter to be just star casting for the sake of star casting, and fears were at an all-high regarding the possibility of a fully CGI'd Audrey II. However, despite the A-list cast, plans were brought to a sudden halt in 2020. I wonder why. Chris Evans, who seemed surprisingly excited for his part and called Little Shop his favorite musical, expressed his disappointment at production never fully starting in a March 2021 interview for Ace Universe.
You know, it hit the brakes for a minute. Just it had some budget issues. You know, when COVID hit, all of a sudden these budgets for films go through the roof, trying to make it a safe place to go to work. I actually just emailed Berlanti, the director, a few weeks ago, just saying, "Hey man, I haven't heard anything. What's going on?" And then he just said, "You know, it's just a little back and forth right now with Warner Brothers. I think a lot of things are up in the air."
Billy Porter added in a May 2021 interview that things were still at a standstill. It's been postponed. I don't know. I just got a call one day that said it was postponed. It may come back, it may not, but that's off right now. And off it turned out to be in the end. In September 2022, Edgerton confirmed how the project had been axed. I just don't get it. There was so much goodwill around it, but it just fizzled out. Who knows if it'll come back, but I can't help but feel that it just might not. Evans had implied in June 2022 that Berlanti had possibly left the project altogether.
I was supposed to do Little Shop of Horrors a couple years ago, and then you know, COVID happened and there were budget issues, and I think the director might have jumped off the project, but that was a heartbreak.
Which may have been the final nail in the Little Shop remake's coffin. Evans and Edgerton certainly seemed excited for it, but fans of the show were generally unimpressed by the potential remake. I was personally just scared of what a musical film by the executive producer of Riverdale would have been like.
I am the sound of distant thunder. But someday.
Wow.
Widely considered one of Sondheim's best pieces, Into the Woods, a mix and match of fairy tales bearing about 1,000 life lessons, finally got a theatrical release in 2014 with a whelming adaptation. Directed by Rob Marshall, this movie didn't fully hit the bullseye, aside from a few select performances and moments. But this, my friends, was far from the first attempt at an Into the Woods movie. This would actually date back to the early 90s, a project that was to be produced by Columbia Pictures, Storyline Productions, and Jim Henson Productions. There seems to be a lot of confusion regarding when the project started, and which different casts, producers, and directors were involved at which point, but I'll try my best. The earliest mention I can find of this movie is from 1991 with a simple announcement. But this specific project seemed to date back to at least 1990, as Sondheim has mentioned multiple times that Jim Henson himself was to be a part of the production before his unfortunate passing in May 1990. And yet, in his book, Look, I Made a Hat, Sondheim said that it was in 1995 that he and Lapine were first approached with the pitch, so I'm not sure he was entirely confident on dates either. The screenplay was to be written by writing duo Lowell Gans and Babaloo Mandel. From my deep, desperate dives into the internet, there are two versions of the script that seem to circulate around, with a third in between them seemingly missing in action. The first draft, dated October 29, 1992, is described by Olaf Jubin as revealing of a handling of the material that, with its mixture of jokiness and sentimentality, is similar in style to other movies centering on family life written by the same team, but that appears too coarse and too flat-footed for the subtlety and intricacy of the original stage work. The seemingly unavailable script, the supposed fourth draft, dated June 29, 1994, is described by fansite Sondheim.com as incurring a great number of changes from the stage show. The Baker's father's plot has been wholly removed alongside the Baker's connection to Rapunzel.
I had a brother!
No! But you had a sister.
I had a
Sister.
No!
There would only be a single giant, the one that Jack kills in Act 1, who survives into Act 2. And, spoiler alert, the Baker's wife actually survives the story, having tricked the giant into thinking she was dead. Finally, the third known script, dated October 15, 1996, was even further different and involved two separate drafts, one with a narrator and one without. There were 2 extra songs written for initial versions of the script. The first, I Wish, was an alternate opening not too dissimilar to the musical's prologue, with miscellaneous villagers talking about their own wishes, the main cast among them.
I wish my wife were not my wife.
I wish I looked like her.
I wish
my life were not my life.
I wish.
The closest comparison I can think of is something like Belle, only everyone's focused on their own lives and woes. The other song, Rainbows, comes in later in the plot, with the baker despairing his inability to have kids.
Who says that we need a rainbow? We've lots to be glad about.
And his wife trying to conceal her impatience with his pessimism.
Stop taking away our rainbow. Don't tell me it's all in vain.
This song would later be used in the 2012 revival of Sondheim's revue musical, Marry Me a Little. At some point, the expected number of new musical numbers changed, and the 1994 version of the screenplay would feature now 4 to 6 extra songs, with several of the stage numbers being either cut, or in Sondheim.com's words, emasculated. There would be an initial reading of the script sometime between 92 and 94 in LA, with Martin Short as the baker, Julia Louis-Dreyfus as his wife, Neil Patrick Harris as Jack, Mary Steenburgen as his mother, Kathy Najimy as Florinda, Janine Garofalo as Lucinda, Cynthia Gibb as Cinderella, Rob Lowe as her prince, Christine Lahti as the witch, Daryl Hannah as Rapunzel, and Michael Jeter as the giant. Some point after this, director Penny Marshall would be attached to the project, and a second reading would happen in her own house in October 1994, with Robin Williams as the baker, Goldie Hawn as his wife, Cher of all people as the witch, Carrie Fisher as Lucinda, Bebe Neuwirth as Florinda, Moira Kelly as Cinderella, Kyle MacLachlan as her prince, Samantha Mathis as Rapunzel, Brendan Fraser as Rapunzel's prince, Elijah Wood as Jack, Roseanne Barr as his mother, Steve Martin as the wolf, and Danny DeVito as the giant. Sondheim himself stated that the reading was really, really good, and that he had thought to himself, if a bomb drops on this house, half of Hollywood would be wiped out. He also stated that Jim Henson himself was there, but by all accounts this was in '94, so he would have been dead for 4 years, so who knows. That would be as far as this version would go, as according to Sondheim, it would be followed shortly by one of those periodic studio shakeups where a new platoon of executives replaces the old one, eager to throw out all the projects begun before their arrival in order to demonstrate the freshness of their rethinking. According to Variety in 1997, the project had indeed been put in turnaround, meaning it was trying to be sold to another studio. By this time, the adaptation seems to have changed quite a bit. Now the director was stated to be Rob Minkoff, with Billy Crystal, Meg Ryan, and Susan Sarandon in talks to play the baker, his wife, and the witch, assumedly. The last piece of news I can seem to find regarding any possibility of this coming to fruition was from Paul McKibbins, who handled the rights to Sondheim's music in December 1997. He insisted that, despite delays, the movie wasn't necessarily dead in the water. Spoiler alert, it was. Nevertheless, in 2003, Rob Marshall, hot off the heels from his hit adaptation of Chicago, approached Sondheim interested in adapting either Sweeney Todd or Follies for the big screen, to which Sondheim instead suggested Into the Woods. Nearly a decade later, Marshall would indeed end up adapting it as previously stated, and finally Sondheim's fairy tale would become a film, albeit minus the Jim Henson puppets and Cher, unfortunately.
We had a
cannons
lot of blowing. A lot of...
Yeah.
And your eyes dry out. So you're really just trying to not be going
like that.
Sondheim and James Goldman's Follies tells the story of a musical revue's cast reunion as their old theater is about to be torn down. It features a cast of characters still reflecting on and dealing with their past lives, particularly the love quadrangle between leads Sally, Phyllis, Ben, and Buddy. The musical is all about the contrast between the hollowness of the characters' musical numbers and the disappointment present in their real lives. Hal Prince, director of the original Broadway production, found particular inspiration from a Life magazine photograph of Gloria Swanson over the ruins of the torn-down Roxy movie theater in Times Square. Similarly, the original Follies cast consisted of old vaudeville actors. Much like Swanson herself, a former silent movie star was cast in the movie Sunset Boulevard. it seemed as if Follies was bound to have an inherent connection with Hollywood. So much so that it was in 1972, only 1 year into the Broadway production, when the idea for a movie adaptation was thrown out. Prince insists that he wanted to bring in the Broadway cast as the principal characters, with cameos from golden era Hollywood stars filling out the rest of the cast. Prince's press agent, John Springer, on the other hand, wanted Follies to have an all-star cast. According to him, he got Bette Davis entranced by I'm Still Here, and she was set to play its singer, Carlotta. He also supposedly brought in Gloria Swanson as Heidi in a sort of full-circle moment for the show. Other stars would have included Gene Kelly as Buddy, Shirley MacLaine / Debbie Reynolds as Sally, Fred Astaire / Richard Burton / Henry Fonda as Ben, Elizabeth Taylor / Ginger Rogers as Phyllis, Leslie Caron as Solange, and Joan Crawford as Hattie. Indeed, Bette Davis and Joan Crawford seemed eager enough for the project that they were willing to both star in it simultaneously, in spite of their famed decades-long rivalry. Apparently, Davis even said, "I won't work with that bitch again, but we wouldn't be in the same scenes." When told of these ideas and supposed casting, Sondheim laughed them off. John Springer made up things. I would say that's apocryphal. He was in love with movies, in love with film stars, and I wouldn't believe one word he said. Whatever the case, Prince had proposed the idea of throwing a 2-night-long party on MGM grounds, to which every star who'd ever worked for MGM would be invited, thus replicating the setting for the musical and recording their conversations, documentary style. From there, the scenes with the main cast would be shot separately and put together in post. Now, if you are lucky enough to be in New York, be sure to visit the New York Public Library, which contains 2 typewritten script scraps for this adaptation, which seem to be extremely artsy, for better or for worse. One presents Mickey Rooney wandering into the sets of the Judge Hardy movie series and conversing with archival footage of Louis Stone, his former, since deceased, co-star. The other is the ending, which has Alexis Smith, a Hollywood actress of the 40s, as Phyllis, a role she originated on Broadway. This ending involves a group photo of the MGM stars being taken, interspersed with shots of dynamite sticks being placed in iconic filming locations. Quote, "As we settle on the close-up of Alexis, we hear in the distance a voice cajoling everyone to smile, which she does, as a flashbulb goes off. Simultaneously with the flashbulb is the explosion. It's Hiroshima again." Very artsy indeed. Despite its bizarre ideas, the general concept of the movie seemed to fit in perfectly with the public's perception of movie musicals by the 1970s. Gone was the golden age of the 30s and 50s, and now the focus was on grit and realism, so breaking out into song and dance was widely seen as outdated, with many movie musicals of this era not being as widely remembered. This movie could have stood out, representing a peeling off of the shiny exterior of the old-timey movie musical, especially by using the famous faces of that genre either as the principal cast or as cameos. And yet, despite the supposed excitement of the stars themselves and the tremendous potential of this adaptation, the project died out. Springer would say in a 2001 letter to the New York Times that Hal Prince wound up having a furious quarrel with someone at MGM and withdrew the project. But according to John P. Flaxman, despite the proposed screenplay by Hugh Wheeler apparently being full of potential, MGM forewent Follies in order to produce At Long Last Love, which has since been listed as one of the worst movies of all time. The setting seems to have been somewhat brought to film in 1974's That's Entertainment, which was a compilation of old numbers and performances intercut with newly shot host segments of aged stars in the run-down MGM backlot. Whether this was on purpose or incidental, we'll never know. Nevertheless, Follies seems to have come back into the movie limelight a few times in the last decade. As previously stated, Rob Marshall approached Sondheim regarding potentially adapting it in 2003, but even in 2015, he restated his interest, potentially teasing the casting of Meryl Streep. In 2007, the New York Times casually dropped that a Follies movie was in development with writer Aaron Sorkin and director Sam Mendes, although this is literally the only mention of this that I could find. Finally, in 2019, Sondheim himself stated that Dominic Cooke, director of the commercially successful 2017 and 2019 London revivals, was attached to a Heyday Films and BBC-produced adaptation of Follies. In December 2021, shortly after Sondheim's passing, the script was confirmed to still be in active development, making this project supposedly still in progress. Sunset Boulevard, based on a 1950 movie of the same title, tells the story of faded silent movie era star Norma Desmond, as she falls in love with both young screenwriter Joe Gillis and the potential of her returning to the movies, both of which eventually lead to disastrous consequences. While Andrew Lloyd Webber was the one who ultimately made this into a musical, both Gloria Swanson, who had played Norma in the original film, and Stephen Sondheim had previously tried to adapt it to the stage, with neither project coming to fruition. Similarly, there have been many attempts of turning the musical into a movie musical, even as far back as 2003, with rumors of Liza Minnelli taking the lead role, a part she was offered to debut on stage but had to turn down due to other commitments. Now, one article by the Daily Telegraph had producer Austin Shaw directly stating that Andrew would love Glenn Close to do the role, and she has been approached. The pair spoke about it privately at this year's Golden Globe ceremony, and she said she would be happy to take it on again. We are making the film with Paramount, and it should be out in time for Christmas 2006. Christmas 2006 came and went, and next we heard of this production was in 2007, when Christopher Hampton, one of the show's lyricists, seemingly took back Shaw's statement and relisted the potential Normas as Glenn Close, Meryl Streep, and Barbra Streisand. As noted by Playbill, each had a connection to the show. Streep had watched the original workshop, Streisand had recorded her own successful covers of Norma's two iconic solos, and Close brought the role to Broadway after Andy broke his contract to transfer Patti LuPone to the American production.
I don't know what her deal was, and I certainly came here thinking this is all that I was going to do.
For the role of Joe Gillis, Hugh Jackman and Ewan McGregor were viewed as the top choices, the former having actually played the role in the 1996 Australian production. Despite the supposed very tight race between big-name celebrities, news were sparse as the years passed by. In a 2011 CNN interview, Andy would say, "I bet you this never ever happens, but you know who would make a great Norma Desmond on screen? Madonna. She's the right age. I've not got through to her. She hasn't taken my call this time."
I've decided I should decline.
That same year, Andy highlighted the possibility of following suit with what he'd done for several of his previous musicals, including Joseph, Cats, and Jeeves, and filming a staged version of Sunset, with Close reprising her role. Quote, "We'd rehearse and use a soundstage or a theater and film it as a performance on stage," unquote. Although a good idea on paper, the cost for setting up the stage and performance from scratch to film would be around £1.5 million. So, not necessarily affordable. Surprisingly, even when the musical was partially restaged with Close in London in 2016, and then on Broadway in 2017, there were no professional recordings made. Finally, however, in February 2019, official announcements were made regarding the project. Close would indeed be the lead, prominent director and choreographer Rob Ashford would direct, and Tom McRae would write the screenplay. Production was to start that October, but delays pushed it to 2020, meaning that, for obvious reasons, it wound up getting pushed even further. As a matter of fact, Andy was still tormenting over these delays as of October 2021. Quote, "I wish I could say it's going into production tomorrow morning, but it's not. Paramount has not wanted to go ahead with it. It's not for want of trying. Glenn Close has been absolutely doggedly trying to get it made." Last update we got was from Close in the 2022 Met Gala, who, while wearing a clearly Norma Desmond-inspired outfit, said, "We're getting closer, believe it or not. We're getting closer." While it seems the movie may indeed finally happen someday, its delays have been almost comical. Just to give you an idea, if it were to start filming in 2023, that means it will have been nearly 20 years since a movie adaptation for Sunset was first announced, and almost 30 years since Close first played the role. This will also mean that Glenn Close will be at least 24 years older than Gloria Swanson was in the original movie. To say that it has been a long time coming would be an understatement of the highest order.
And now, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Nevertheless, this is a movie musical that is supposedly in production. And that concludes our list of unproduced movie musical adaptations. Thank you for watching. If you're interested in any more of this content, please let us know, as there are quite a few other interesting unproduced productions that we couldn't quite fit into this video. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed, like and subscribe, and see you next time.